Welcome to the Top Cast. I'm your host, the incredible T.O.P. And before I get started, I would like to say to you guys, tonight's episode is talking about black women. So if you're going to get in trouble with your black woman, you might not want to be here right now. But anyway, welcome back to the Top Cast. And on tonight's episode, titled Zaddy, part 3 of a 3-part series. This particular part is entitled The Architect and the Oracle, which incidentally or coincidentally, we happen to see in the persons of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So if you ain't got your helmet already, go get it, get prepared, because 2021 is going to be a very interesting year. And Lord forbid, President Biden doesn't kick the bucket because he is an older guy. Because then you really ain't going to be able to tell these black women nothing. Even though technically speaking, Kamala Harris is not a black woman, though she is a non-white woman. So before I begin this dialogue, I want to start out with 2 quotes. The first one coming from Dr. Chancellor Williams. When you say that blacks hate blacks, it's not just a myth. Quietly, we do not have the same respect for members of our own race as we do for some other race, especially the white race. Now, the overall premise of this 3-part series is dealing with not only just interracial relationships in regards to black women, but black men also, because they're both as very detrimental to the entire group of black people. And most black people fail to realize that this is the case. But, you can't force people to do whatever it is that you want them to do. People have to do things by choice. Nonetheless, I want to get on to the second quote, which is by one Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., and then I'll get into the body of the discussion. The so-called hidden sexual activity between white males and black females has done more towards maintaining confusion in the movement to eliminate racism than any other single factor. The black female, in particular, is the quote-unquote open back door through which the male white supremacist, racist, completes and parades his cycle of racism. And like I mentioned in the beginning, whether it's by coincidence or not, we see in this very relationship embodied in the persons of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. When I look at them, I see Thomas Jefferson and Sally Heming. And both of these quotes are to point out key points in, the entire discussion. Please make sure that you go and check out parts 1 and 2, because it's very important so that you'll understand this dialogue in context and the overall context of what I'm talking about. But the 2 preceding quotes from Dr. Williams and Mr. Fuller point out, firstly, some key things about we black people as a group of people. One is that we've always seemed to have had a disdain towards each other. Now, I don't know exactly how far back that goes, but salute Most, man. I appreciate you being here, bro. But I don't know exactly how far back that goes. But what I can say, based on the historical record, is that at least in the era since we've been writing down history, human history, our own history as Black people, since we've encountered outside people or non-Africans, we have seemed to have a preference in choosing these quote unquote outsiders over our own people. And I say this to say that the fact that we do it now in 2021, at least to me, is not a surprise, because I'm aware of the fact that I just pointed out, that as a people, we have a history of this type of behavior. And so in my mind, the conclusion I inevitably come to is that in our current situation, we fail to understand this fact about this historical behavioral fact about us as a group of people, a collective group of people. And it's to our detriment, because as a group of people, we're going to remain in the position that we're in on this planet as long as we go against a sensible code for ourselves, which is group first. So I'll give you an example. How we as Black people specifically should behave is not unlike how white people behave, because white people fight amongst each other all the time. Just look at World War I and World War II. They're very great examples of this. Yet they do not fight each other on the behalf of other people. And that's what we Black people don't do, which is why I'm pointing this out, based on the quote that I gave from Dr. Williams, us having a historical disdain for each other. So it's no wonder to me why we are in the position that we're in. This is a contributing factor to it. And to address Mr. Fuller's quote, what his quote points out to me is two things. One, not so much that Black women have, quote unquote, sold the Black man out, or that she has a history of selling the Black man out. But I look at it in another light. And what I see is, as men, how is it that outside men are able to come in to our midst and war against us using our very own women? What I'm essentially saying is, how is it that our women can be so easily swayed against us? What is it that we are not doing as Black men? That's the question that I ask anytime I hear people bring up the fact that Black women have a historical record of selling out Black men. And I ask that question because I noticed that a lot of Black men are up in arms about the fact that they just noticing that this is the behavior of Black women in America specifically, when in reality, this behavior has been happening since at least ancient Egypt. So to me, it's nothing new. And I don't really see why guys get mad about it. Because if you did any extensive reading of history, you would be aware of this. And it would then, or it should not then, upset you, because you would understand things in context, which is how I like to discuss things, by the way. A lot of people just, they scratch the surface when they have a discussion about a topic. And they don't really, get as in depth as they should or could. I too am guilty of the same thing. So that's how I know. Anyway, Some source material to go along with this discussion, because this is how I organized it, to give you guys some context as to how we as a group of people have arrived where we are today in our position among other groups of people on this planet, all the way back to when at least I recognized that it first started or became a negative trend. So the first source of material that makes it very obvious that we as a group of people have always held some animosity towards each other, and where not only Black men, but Black women, most notably, Queen Nefertiti is a shining example of the historical behavior of Black women having interracial relationships with white men. Nefertiti and Mark Antony, who was of Rome, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So the first book is called Destruction of Black Civilization. It's authored by Dr. Chancellor Williams, the same Dr. Chancellor Williams who I quoted previously in the beginning of this dialogue. And from this book, what you'll get is some historical context of Black people, or our people, when we were at what can be considered our height. And over the course of this discussion, each text that I reference for you to go and read and research will take you on a gradual descent from us as a people being at the top to us at the people being now on the bottom, which is where we are here in 2021. But the destruction of Black civilization is the very first piece of literature written by a Black person that I would refer you to read, because it is a shining example of our historical behavior as Black people. And that historical behavior carried all the way to today is still a detriment to us as a group of people. A lot of us don't like to talk about it. We don't want to address it publicly. We're very disingenuous and dishonest about it. And as long as we continue to operate in such a manner, we're going to continue to get the same results that we've been getting so far, which is to be at the bottom collectively as a group, and specifically as Black men, because Black men of all groups of people, male or female, are in fact on the very bottom of the social ladder, even underneath Black women, but not by much. So, in summary, the destruction of Black civilization provides the backdrop for our historical negative behaviors towards each other and our historical behaviors in regard to interracial relationships. Now, it doesn't really go into any specifics about African males, but you kind of get the picture, especially in reference to male rulers. And it didn't just be in there, but the same can be said of Black women. So I say this to say, as Black men, if you read this book and you realize how long ago we was on top when ancient Egypt was popping, then it should be no surprise to you. And you shouldn't get mad over the fact that black women sleep with white men or that white men have the access to them that they do. It's nothing new under the sun. So you shouldn't be surprised. Anyway, continuing on. The next major incident in our history as a group of people is very well embodied in the text by I.E. Kwei Armah, called 2000 Seasons. Now, this book is a work of fiction, so you have to take that into consideration. However, it highlights a lot of historical events. In particular, the Arab slave trade and the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade. And these two periods also are characterized by our behavior as Black people, as a group, in regards to us having animosity towards each other and us as men and women having interracial relationships with outside groups or non-African people in the form of Arabs during the Arab slave trade and whites later on during the Atlantic slave trade, as we'll get to in the next text. But like I mentioned, although this book is a work of fiction, it's accurate and is detailed in reference to actual historical events. And a lot of Black people, in particular Muslims, either don't know or outright ignore the tragedy of the Arab slave trade and the devastating effects it had on Africa and African people, our people, us. Maybe it's out of convenience. I don't know. Again, it could be out of ignorance. But in particular, during the Arab slave trade, a lot of Black women were taken as concubines. And some Black women, like we later learned during the Atlantic slave trade, did not participate directly in the selling of slaves or the procuring of slaves, but they were a vessel through which an outside group was able to come into Africa and dominate us as a group of people. And the reason why I point this out is because, again, it highlights, oh, thank you, Mr. Bush, welcome. It highlights the fact that us as Black men were not doing what we should have been doing at that time. And the evidence of that is how our women were treated. Because from, what I had to say previously in regards to destruction of a Black civilization, what you'll notice is that the situation gets progressively worse as I go along, especially in reference to Black women. And this is why I don't really have, I don't harbor all these ill feelings a lot of these dudes on the internet do in regards to Black women. But during the Arab slave trade, Black women, Black men also, but Black women specifically, because I need to highlight this, were treated probably twice as worse as what we hear tell about white folks when they enslaved us. But that to say that, or that to point out to us as Black men, what were we doing during the Arab slave trade that the Arabs were able to come into our lands and do the damage that they did to us, our lands, and do what they did to our women? what exactly was black men doing about that? And I could tell you very little, because if you know anything about Islamic history, which is primarily when the Arab slave trade happened, a lot of black men took on the religion of Islam, and they still practice it today all over the place in Africa. This all to say that us as black men, at key moments in history, during the destruction of black civilization or ancient Egypt times, on down to now, the time I'm speaking about during the Arab slave trade, we played a part in our women turning out to be like they are now today. But as black men, we don't want to admit that, because if it starts with the man, then we have to own up to our part, and we can't lay everything that has happened to us at the feet of women, especially since women are not warriors. They don't go to fight. We do. And this entire discussion is in response to all of these guys that come on the internet that seem to have some kind of issue with black women. But they also come on the internet to try to figure out how to get them. Go figure. Anyway, the book 2000 Seasons, like I said, highlights mainly what we went through during the Arab slave trade, and it begins to touch on the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade. But my point in mentioning this book is because of the time and history that it references. But you are always free to do your own research on the Arab slave trade, because it happened before the Atlantic slave trade. So the way that our women behave in America today didn't just start since we've been here in America or in the past 500 years. Their behavior has been happening in part because we as men have allowed it to happen since ancient Egypt. But anyway, check out the book 2000 Seasons. All of the links for these texts are in the description for this video, along with parts 1 and 2 of this 3-part series and some other reference materials. But moving along, the next text that I decided to highlight to speak about this issue is called Daughters of the Trade. And it's written by a white woman named Pernille Ipsom, I-P-S-O-M. Her name and her videos in the description below also. But what she highlights in this video, or in her text specifically, is how black women are now, is being recorded, because this happened in the Arab slave trade also. It's just hasn't been discussed as of yet. But in this text, what she highlights is the distinct relationship that develops between white slavers and black females. And again, this text, it jumps out at me as so obvious, and I don't see how guys miss it. Is how can white slavers come to Africa and marry black women with black men not having any input in that arrangement whatsoever? That to say, a lot of guys refer to this text to prove their point that black women been been participating in interracial relationships at least since the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade, even though I've pointed out it's been happening since longer than that. But they run to this book to point out Black women's dastardly deeds, but they never asked that question that I just posed. What were Black men doing when these Black women were marrying white men coming to Africa to buy slaves? And furthermore, who was actually going to get these slaves? Because these arrangements took place out on the coast. The slaves came from the interior. But that's a whole nother discussion, because that could tie into Black Muslims. And we really don't like having these conversations as Black people as it is. So that's a whole nother can of worms. But the reason why I chose this text is because it highlights a pattern, the beginning of the pattern that we see right now today out of Black women in America, which is their disdain, which I've already pointed out. We as Black people have a historical disdain for each other. But what that book points out is Black women's willing involvement, not only in interracial relationships, but the selling of their own people. Now, in Black women's and Black men's defense, what I will say is I don't think that at that time when, folks from Ghana, the Akans specifically, and you could go research this, at that time, I don't think they understood the full scope of what exactly they were participating in. And white people probably didn't understand what it would turn into eventually either. But that's besides the point. I just wanted to point that out. But in this book, Daughters of the Trade, Atlantic Slavers and Interracial Marriages on the Gold Coast of Africa, it highlights a 150-year period in which 5 generations of African women participated in interracial relationships for the express purpose of conducting business in the selling and trafficking of human cargo or Africans as slaves. And all this to say that when guys do point out that Black women have engaged in this behavior historically, they are absolutely correct. And I will never, ever disagree or argue with them about it. And I also agree with them that it is incorrect behavior. But my question is always, okay, how do we fix it? Because we can't go back to the year 1700 and undo what's already been done. And that's what I see a lot of guys coming on the internet and doing. They're not really coming up with a viable solution to our problem as Black people, specifically here in America. And in my opinion, it seems what the popular trend is for people to run away from the problem. And we'll get to that. But like I was saying, in this book, it highlights that, what I said, that, it is true that Black women have a historical seemingly disdain for black people because they were willing to participate in the selling of Black people. And in my opinion, that is incorrect behavior, incorrect and counterproductive. Anyway, check out that text. It's very good. It's written by a white woman. So I do have a copy that I borrowed from the library because I will not pay for a white person's text to tell me the evil deeds that they performed against me and my people. But I will get it from the library for free. Anyway, The next text I want to cover is called The American Slave Coast, and it's subtitled A History of the Slave Breeding Industry. And it's written by Ned and Constance Sublett. Again, all of these books and other references are in the description below. Easy for you guys to research this. But this, where Daughters of the Trade began the Atlantic slave trade, this book occurs at the ending of the Atlantic slave trade, or around the year 1808, when white people decided that we're no longer going to import people directly from Africa. And what they began doing is they began systematically raping Black women to produce an entirely new caste of people. And when I say caste, I mean CASTE, or group, which is the current group of Black people that you have today, us. So I say that to point out the fact that, one, Black people in America today, although we are of African genetic stock, we didn't come directly from Africa. And we are actually an amalgamation of the native people who were here when white folks came, Africans, and white people. But the reason why I selected this text for this discussion is because this text is what leads us into Black women's current bad behavior that we all get on the internet and disparage them for. And the reason why I picked out this text is because what we do as Black men, Black women also, what we fail to realize, and only we as Black people do this. We're the only group of people who has been victimized constantly since at least 1492. And yet in 2021, we still have a problem considering ourselves to be victims of a crime against humanity. And I find that to be a tragedy in and of itself. But anyhow, the reason why I selected this text is because the current group of Black women that we are familiar with in 2021 come directly from the group of women that are produced during this slave breeding process, which is why, in part, they don't submit to Black men in America, because we didn't create them, for one. And they were created for a specific purpose, which is to keep us in our place, so to speak, or, to say it another way. And that to say, if you have this understanding, this historical understanding, then you will not have the attitude and the red pill rage that a lot of guys do. Because red pill rage is not just about sexual frustration and not being able to get women to sleep with. Red pill rage is also about being mad with Black women because of the position that they were put in to keep us as Black men in a specific position in regards to white folks. So Black women, based on the events of this book, are a created group of women created specifically for no other purpose than to keep the Black males that they give birth to in a checkmate type position where we're not able to affect or do anything that's going to change our situation. That to say, while they are guilty of the action of doing what they do, ultimately, what we as Black men fail to realize, from my point of view, is that while she is part of the problem, she's not the cause of the problem. And if you want her to stop being a problem, you have to go after the source, the architect. Because just like in the movie The Matrix, The oracle wasn't the one who built the matrix. The architect was. And we as black men, we fail to have this discussion. And I think that is quite cowardly for us to have all this animosity towards black women and not have the same animosity towards the group of men who put black women up to the shenanigans that they engage in against us. But I could be wrong in saying that. How you doing, D Will? Says, I think most are so concerned about obtaining tangible materialistic goods that they are not concerned about the condition of the black collective. Well, that's not just black women. That's black men too, D Will. It applies, I would say, equally to both of us. But what we fail to realize as black men is that as women, it's in their nature to be drawn to men with power and men with resources. And we as black men don't like to admit that we don't have the kind of power like white men do. We don't have the control of resources like white men do. And so it should be no surprise to us why black women act out of order like they do. We have nothing to punish them with. So that to say they don't have no incentive to listen to us. So it makes no sense for us as black men, individually or as a group, to harbor any ill will because of what they're doing. Because like I just pointed out, the problem is not really the women. The problem is these white people. That's the conversation that we as black men don't want to have, because then it puts the onus on us as men to go out there and handle business so that we don't have this problem out of these women. But guys don't want to have that conversation because it's easier to talk about women. Just like with black people generally, it's easier for us to pick on each other and to beef with each other than to go take it to the people who cause the problem, which is white folks. And we all know it, but we don't want to talk about it because it's painful. Nobody likes to know that they've been made a fool of. And black people, like Malcolm X famously said up on that soapbox in the movie, you've been hoodwinked. You've been bamboozled. Nobody likes to know that they've been made a fool of. But anyway, continuing on, because I got sidetracked a little bit there, but not a problem. This book, The American Slave Coast, is also written by white folks. And I don't own a copy of it personally, but I do have a copy on loan from the library because I've read it 3 times so far. Because it's a very thick book, takes some time to read. It's about 1,000 pages. But again, the reason why I selected this text, because it's probably the only text I could think of right offhand that highlights this mostly unknown fact of how we as black people came to even exist in America based on what white people have to say. Let me add that in there. And I don't think that white people have any reason to lie about the dastardly deeds that they've done to us, because they do have a history about bragging or of bragging about how big and bad they are, and how bad they could treat you. But this text highlights, basically the same black woman that we are familiar with in 2021. She's existed since at least 1808 or the mid 1800s. So I say that to say that this behavior out of black women is not new. I mean, we all are familiar with Sojourner Truth. She was a feminist. And like the Pimp God pointed out, she wasn't asking black men, did we consider her a woman? She was talking to white men. So I say that to say that black women have been exhibiting this behavior pattern for a long, long time. So we guys in 2021, we got to get over this shit, because being emotional about it with no solution is not going to get you anywhere. You're just going to be mad for no reason. But anyway, check out that book. Again, the link for this book is in the description below. I believe there is an audio book of it. If it's not in the description, then as soon as I get hold on it, I'll add it to the description later. But definitely check out this book, because all of these texts, especially the 4 that I covered so far, Destruction of a Black Civilization by Dr. Chancellor Williams, 2000 Seasons by I.E. Kwei Armah, Daughters of the Trade, Atlantic Slavers and Interracial Marriages on the Gold Coast by Pernille Ipsum, and The American Slave Coast, A History of the Slave Breeding Industry by Ned and Constance Sublett. These 4 books will put a lot of what we see happening amongst us as a people, and, you know, globally, generally, will put into perspective or into context, you know, how we got to be in the position that we're in as a group of Black people. Anyway, moving along. The next text that I would like to cover is a work of nonfiction written by Miss Renethia Tate. And I personally have this book in my library. Miss Tate is a Black woman. I have an autographed copy of her book. There's an audio version of her book done on the Cows program, and I think at least 3 interviews. All this stuff is linked down in the description. This is probably one of the you know, best videos I've done in terms of putting information in the description. But this particular book is unique because what it exposes, and I've said this to a lot of guys before since I've been kicking it, you know, on Instagram and here on YouTube, that, you know, nowadays when you are out here dating these women, you'd be surprised, you know, if you asked how many Black women have had a sexual encounter with a white man or more than one white man. But a lot of guys don't even ask Black women these questions. And so they, you know, a lot of guys are not aware of the fact that a lot of these Black women that you see right now today in 2021 have had sex with a white man in some way, shape, or form. And all that to say that for all of those guys out there who angry at Black women for, you know, selling us out and doing all of the dastardly shit that they've done, and, you know, they are right about calling them out about it, because Black women did do it. But these are the same women that you guys come on the internet to get dating advice about. So I'm confused. You know, to me, that's kind of like some passive aggressive behavior. You can't be mad at Black women as a group, you know, and then you're not mad at them and you still want to fuck with them. Either don't fuck with them and don't talk about them, or shut up and fuck with them, because it's really not a good look as a guy to talk cold shit about Black women and then turn around and fuck with them anyway. Or if you talk about Black women and how they engage in interracial relationships, it's not a good look as a Black dude for you to conversely go and deal with white women, because it makes you look like a hypocrite. And I can't respect that personally. But this book is called Pieces of a Puzzle by Renethia Tate. And it's a collection of 17 interviews with Black women, and I think 12 or 13 interviews with white men. And this book highlights what I referenced in Mr. Fuller's quote in the beginning of this program, and that is the so-called hidden sexual activity between black women and white men. Because as I just pointed out, a lot of guys are unaware that the black woman that you're sleeping with right now, maybe even your mama or your auntie or your sister done screwed a white dude before. So if you're mad at black women for interracial relationships, next time you get a chance, look at the women in your family, because they more than likely done been part of the shit too. So, this is why it defeats the purpose. And like I said, while we as men should cease and desist arguing with women about what women gonna do anyway, instead of taking up our issue with the person who's causing our women to behave in the fashion that they are. But this book is very interesting, because what I came to learn and what I've learned since I've been actually having these same conversations with black women who I know personally, is that in a lot of cases, when white men get with black women in these interracial relationships, they usually have some kind of perverted sex with them. And what I mean by that is that they are usually not interested in penetrating them. And a lot of black women will tell you that when they date white guys, they have a lot of oral sex with them. And white guys on the low, so I've been told, don't really consider themselves a man until they have some kind of sexual relations with a black woman. But this book in particular points out that this, allegedly hidden activity, which Mr. Fuller says is the most detrimental contributor to this thing we call racism continuing, points out quite clearly that not only do white men have access, or the kind of access that they have to black women, but that a lot of black women willingly engage in these activities and interracial relationships with white men. And they don't really understand the gravity of their actions. Because like a lot of us black people, we when it comes to thinking about, talking about, or doing something about the problem of racism and the issues that it causes us, we often don't have an accurate understanding of it. We often don't understand, how our behaviors contribute to the continuation of this unjust system and all of the destruction and devastation that it causes us as a group of people. And it's very unfortunate, because a lot of black people, black women specifically, don't realize that white folks, men and women, when it comes to us black people, especially in regards to sex, they view us like little children, or like some kind of exotic oddity, not unlike a beast, if you will. It's kind of sex for white people with black people is not unlike bestiality. I mean, just think of all of the things, the different names, the different derogatory names white people call us. I mean, how could you call somebody a nigger and then you want to fuck them? That means you're insane, at least to me. But please check out Miss Tate's book. I would recommend that you email Miss Tate and you get the book from her directly, because she will send you an autographed copy and it will come to you directly from her rather quickly. I think it only took like 3 days for me to get mine. It came all the way from like Michigan or something. But I advocate that we buy black as often as we possibly can. one of the most notable ways that I practice that is I buy a lot of books written by Black people. Because in all honesty, as much as we don't like to admit it, we are in a really, really bad place as a group of people. We don't manufacture anything, which is highlighted in part 2 of this 3-part series. And the fact that we don't manufacture anything has a lot to do with why we have some of the problems out of Black women that we have, which I pointed out in part 1 of this 3-part series. So before I get out of here, again, I just want to go over the 5 texts that I discussed in this broadcast, those 5 being, and make sure you check them out. I got links to all of this information in the description of this video below, so there's no excuse for you not to be able to find it. I've already pointed out the way. But book number 1 is Destruction of Black Civilization by Dr. Chancellor Williams. It's going to give you a historical backdrop all the way back to ancient Egypt. And for any of you who are unaware, that we are talking the time period that it's taken us to get to what we see today as Black people, the current state that we're in. This didn't happen overnight. It didn't even happen in the 500 years that we've been under the foot of white people. This has been an ongoing process for about 6,000 years. That to say that we have fallen from a very great height. And right now we're on the lowest of the low. But at this point in history, we have an opportunity. And we could very well miss it by doing a whole bunch of unnecessary arguing and finger pointing instead of just solving the problem. But that first book is a great way to start off. The second book was 2000 Seasons, which is a book of fiction. And by the way, I didn't mention this earlier, but if you read this book, 2000 Seasons, I really suggest that you find an audiobook version because it's a lot easier to listen to. But if you read it, get a dictionary. You're gonna need a dictionary to read this book because there's a lot of words in there, because it's written in a kind of a poetic style, but there's going to be a lot of words in there that you don't know. And if you don't go look up the meaning, what's being said in the book might not make any sense, if you understand what I'm saying. So for the book 2000 Seasons, you need a dictionary, unfortunately, or get the audiobook version. That's book number 2. And that book basically, although a work of fiction, and salute to you, Mr. Ali, although a work of fiction, highlights the period of the Arab slave trade, which preceded the Atlantic slave trade, which takes us into the next text, which highlights the interracial behavior of Black women. And although unsaid, the negligence of us as Black men. In the book, Daughters of the Trade, Atlantic Slavers and Interracial Marriages on the Gold Coast by Pernille Ipsum. She's a white woman. Get her book from the library or check her out on YouTube. Links is in the description below. Which then takes us into, or through the slave trade and to the end of it, when the slave breeding industry began in the United States, which produced us, the current group of Black people. And that book is called The American Slave Trade, A History of the Slave Breeding Industry, and it's written by Ned and Constance Sublett, husband and wife authors. They're white too. Get their book from the library. But that book highlights how this current group, us as Black people in America, came to be. Because a lot of us, some of us know, most of us don't, that us as a group of people are actually a homegrown people. We are from right here in the United States. We never been from anywhere else. We are a group of people that, although we are descendants from Africans who were
came primarily to the Caribbean and then later on to the Americas. But none of us after the 1900s came from Africa, or even the mid 1800s came from Africa. We were produced right here, and we are the product of rape, in case you weren't aware. And the last book, Pieces of a Puzzle, written by Miss Renethia Tate, is a book that highlights, the so-called hidden sexual activity between Black women and white men, because a lot of us guys, especially those of us who date Black women and have dated quite a lot of Black women over the course of our lifetime, a lot of us don't ever ask them, have they ever had sex with a white man? And so we don't know. And we are completely ignorant about it. And I mention that because a lot of the guys who come on the internet and talk about, the dastardly deeds of Black women historically in reference to us as Black men have had some kind of intimate situation with the very same Black women that they talk about. And to me, it makes no sense to do that. But, I can't tell y'all what to do, but I do know what I'm going to do. And with that, I will end out saying that I appreciate all you guys for coming. D. Will, Mr. Ali, Cam Bash, Most Man, and for all of you folks who are going to catch the playback, I appreciate you for watching. Go follow me on both of my Instagram pages, The Incredible T.O.P and the Top Cast, which is the Top Cast Instagram page. I now have the link in my YouTube channel banner for my TikTok page, because I'm on TikTok too. That's right. Top is on TikTok. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube page. If you haven't, bring a friend, like, comment, share, and share the material. Also, season 2 has started already on Anchor. Episode 2 is already up. Check out episodes 1 and 2, season 2. Salute to all of you guys. Again, thank you for coming. This has been another episode of the Top Cast. I am your host, the Incredible T.O.P. You can Cash App or PayPal me. It'll help me to improve equipment for my studio so that I can bring better broadcasts to you guys, better quality broadcast and more interactive. We're going to get out of here with a hot joint that I think you guys can appreciate. I certainly appreciate it. Once again, thanks for coming. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.